Hello and welcome back to River Rock Restoration. This is Dustin Blystone, and I'm going through a series on my book Isaiah, a Biblical Microcosm. In this session, we're going to look at books 4 through 6 and their relationship to Isaiah chapters 4 through 6. The reason we're doing multiple books this time is that because occasionally there's only one connection found between that particular book and that particular chapter of Isaiah, or in the case of this first one that we're going to do here, the Isaiah chapter happens to be extraordinarily short. There's only a few verses in the whole chapter, and so there's really not much to go on in terms of finding connections because there's only room for one connection. So that's what we see here in this particular first one that we're going to do here in this session. So let's jump in. And also, this is one point that I also made to another dissenter early on when I first published this back in 2007, 2008. I was trying to promote it. And, somebody made the argument that, well, the book of Isaiah is so long and there's so many chapters in it and there's so much content in it that if you look hard enough, of course you'll find something from each chapter that would correlate to the book of Genesis, because Genesis is so comprehensive and so vast that of course you're going to be finding concepts in Genesis, Exodus. These are huge books, and Isaiah is a huge long book of prophecy. So you're just finding things that anybody would find. But as I attempted to argue back to that person who made that argument, my rebuttal to that one was simply that, okay, well, that may be valid for a couple of chapters here and there and a couple of books here and there. There's also incredibly short books in the Bible. For instance, Obadiah in the Old Testament, or 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John in the New Testament, the book of Jude as an example. And then also there's very short chapters in Isaiah. Chapter 4 of Isaiah is extremely short, and I believe it only has 6 verses maybe in the whole chapter. And so, that kind of stopped him in his tracks with that argument that he was making. Also, there were some connections that were very hard to find. They were very difficult. They were hidden or buried deep, and they had to be alluded to through inferential means. And so, no, I don't think it is true that you can just find, that we're finding whatever we want to find here. I think it's a legitimate study, and we see it happen here. This is the first time this happens in Isaiah chapter 4. Okay, so let me switch over here and get to the text. Okay, so in this particular connection, there's only one that I was able to discover in the book of Numbers. It doesn't mean that there might not be more, and that's true for all of these. I encourage anyone to who's into this, by all means, look for other ones that I may have missed. Maybe there's some subtle connections, or even not so subtle connections that I just didn't quite see for whatever reason. So there may be more, but this is the one that I did discover. In Numbers 14:14, it says, "For thou, O Lord, art seen eye to eye, while thy cloud stands over them, and thou dost go before them in a pillar of cloud by day, and in a pillar of fire by night." So that's the famous account that everybody remembers from Exodus. And I was actually thinking that there might be something like that in Isaiah chapter 2, because I was looking for it with Exodus, because everybody remembers the famous account of the pillar of cloud by day and the fire by night. However, if you actually count them up and you look at it, you'll see that concept and that the history of that, when that was actually happening as he was leading them through the wilderness, that actually happens much more frequently, and it's recounted many more times actually in the book of Numbers. So this isn't the only time that we see this here in the book of Numbers. This is just the one that I chose to highlight here in the study. But it says, "For thou, O Lord, art seen eye to eye, while thy cloud stands over them, and thou dost go before them in a pillar of cloud by day, and a pillar of fire by night. And then in Isaiah, and this is what stumped that dissenter who was making that argument that I just shared with you. I showed him how short Isaiah chapter 4 is. It's extremely short. And it just so happens that right at the end of the chapter, a very short chapter, it says, Then the Lord will create over the whole area of Mount Zion, and over her assemblies, a cloud by day, even smoke, and the brightness of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory will be a canopy. And so this is alluding once again to a future event. This is a yet unfulfilled prophecy, a prophecy which will be fulfilled either during the millennium or during the tribulation period and then the millennium. We don't know exactly the timing of this, but this is a yet future event that's speaking to the initial pattern which was set up as they came out of Egypt and were wandering in the wilderness in anticipation of entering the promised land. Okay, so again, that's the only connection that I was able to find in Numbers to Isaiah chapter 4, but it's a very strong and powerful connection. And again, what makes it even stronger is the fact that Isaiah chapter 4 is an incredibly short chapter with very little content. There's very little ideas or concepts there, just for the simple fact that there's so few verses. And yet one of the verses alludes directly to this thing that was happening in the book of Numbers. All right, so since that's the only one we had in that one, I'm gonna sometimes double or triple up when we have something like that, so that I don't want to make just a 3-minute video because there's only one connection. So I'll do a couple at a time in situations where there was only one connection per book chapter relationship. Okay, so in the book 5, this is Deuteronomy, and we have this particular warning. In Deuteronomy 11:17, it says, Or the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its fruit, and you will perish quickly from the good land which the Lord is giving you. Okay, and in Isaiah, so this is book 5, and then in Isaiah chapter 5:6, it says, And I will lay it waste, it will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. I will also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it. For 10 acres of vineyard will yield only 1 bath of wine, and a homer of seed will yield but an ephah of grain. So again, talking about shutting up the heavens so that there will be no rain. And once again, the Lord speaking, I will also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it, because he's bringing destruction because of disobedience. And so again, you see a perfect parallel there between a concept that is established in the book, and then it is reconfirmed or actualized in or paralleled in some way in the corresponding Isaiah chapter. Okay, so again, that was one where I was only able to find, at this time, only one connection between book 5, Deuteronomy, and Isaiah chapter 5. So we'll go ahead and go on to the next one, and this is the book of Joshua. So in book 6, chapter 6, we have here seen that in Joshua chapter 11, verse 20, this one's very interesting because it says, For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts to meet Israel in battle, in order that he might utterly destroy them, that they might receive no mercy. Okay, so here it is talking about the Canaanite tribes that were there, and these were also the tribes that were polluted and corrupted with Nephilim seed, and they were also heavily intertwined with and heavily corrupted by the various forms of the Nephilim. We know that in Deuteronomy they're given several names. We know they're called Nephilim in Genesis 6 and elsewhere, but they're also called Rephaim, Emim, Zamzumim, Avim, and a few other terms based on what region and what area and what Canaanite tribes they were intermixed with. And so as God was taking care of this corruption of the human genome and the gene pool problem that created. He was also establishing Israel in the land and having them take down the giants and the powerful tribes, the Canaanite tribes that were in the place where God had promised to give to Abraham's descendants. So the interesting thing is that look at this connection in Isaiah chapter 6. It says, "Render the hearts of this people fat, their ears dull, and their eyes be smeared, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and return and be healed." Now, we know that Jesus actually quotes this, chapter 6, in reference to the Jewish leadership of the time during his earthly ministry. So he is actually calling upon Isaiah's prophecy here, and saying that rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. And, he's talking about their hearts being hardened or fat in this case, and their eyes, either ears dull, their eyes besmeared or blind, so that they can't see or hear or understand, to return and be healed, because they're past the point of God's grace and mercy with them because of their wicked disobedience. And so there's a point where you can cross the line of no return, and you can become so dead and so hardened in your heart against God and against Christ that you're now being reserved, all your actions and everything that you're doing are being reserved for judgment. So I find it interesting that here Israel, this is happening to Israel's enemies, so that God can give Israel victory. But here it's happening to Israel. They're the ones, the Jewish leadership are the ones that are being hardened and dulled to spiritual truth so that they can be judged. So remember that God is no respecter of persons, and Paul also warns us that we have to be careful ourselves as the church, that we're not to think that we're this special privileged people that can do no wrong and that everything will always go well for us. Well, that's not true, because if we are living lives of disobedience and not living lives of sanctification and fruitfulness, spiritual fruitfulness, then we are just as subject to have God's chastisement come upon us as any other group of people. So we have to be careful in our walk to make sure that we are walking close to Him. So in Joshua chapter 6, that was actually again another book where I only found one connection between the two. And so I don't think that makes it less valid. I think it makes the whole study more valid, because if you start trying to do it yourself, you'll see that it's actually very difficult to find connections between many of the books of the Bible and the relative Isaiah chapter. But there is at least one concrete connection in each book to each chapter. Sometimes because the chapter or the book is so short, or both, and sometimes just because there's only one particular concept that's highlighted out that parallels between the two. So that is our session on Numbers, book 4 through Isaiah chapter 4, and Joshua all the way up to Joshua book 6 to Isaiah chapter 6. So I hope you've enjoyed this particular session. We were able to knock out three books and chapters there in one session. So we'll be back to pick up where we left off in the book of Judges and Ruth. We'll probably do those two together as well. And then we'll start fresh with 1 Samuel after that. So God bless you. Hope you're enjoying the series, and we'll see you in the next video.